All right, hello. Welcome to this very first introductory episode of Braver New Worlds. My name is Nathan Young. I am going to be the host for this podcast. For those of you that know me, you're probably wondering why it took me so long to do something like this, to start a podcast. It seems like a pretty natural fit for the type of work I do. Don't really have a good answer for that. That's not going to be a whole episode in and of itself, so I'm just going to leave that one for now and just say, here we are. We're doing it now. This is going to be our very first introductory episode. Just wanted to do this real quick, just lay the foundation for what this is all going to be about before I get into the conversational episodes that will be coming up next. So it's going to be a quick rundown of what this podcast is going to be, why I'm creating this, and how this fits into a bigger picture for what I'm putting together from here on out too. So Braver New Worlds is going to be a podcast about the type of stories we need to tell about ourselves, about our work, and about the world that we're trying to create. The tagline for the podcast is going to be the stories we need to tell for the future we want to create. And so that's what this podcast will be. I'm envisioning each episode of this podcast being a very thoughtful and human conversation with somebody who's actively trying to create change in their world. This might be through their work, through their leadership, through their creativity, their activism, or simply through how they're showing up in relationship to others. A big part of the conversations will be about identity, values, doubt, the personal challenges and conflicts we experience in our work, the contradictions, our own experiences, and also the way that our perceived reality shapes the way we live and lead. And especially in these times we're living in now, where a lot of things feel very, very uncertain. And part of the reason why I'm starting this podcast is because, I've noticed something with myself and with the people I'm drawn to in my own world, is that there's a lot of very thoughtful, well-intentioned people that are trying to do meaningful work in this world, but it's difficult. We don't always reward meaningfulness and thoughtfulness in the way our world operates right now. It's got a very fragmented world, a very polarized world where a lot of things are changing. It's kind of unclear where things are going. Yet so much of our world rewards certainty, speed, and confidence. The motto of move fast and break things has been a popular one over the years. I think it's sort of phasing out now, but it's very much like part of how our world is designed. Yet that's not how I want to live. I know it's not how a lot of people that are going to be listening to this want to live. How do we manage living in a world that doesn't always allow us to show up with our full values and what we think is right and meaningful and important? And on top of all that, sometimes some of the most thoughtful and intentional of us are also the ones that hold ourselves back the most, that feel like we need to have everything figured out and need to be able to fully validate every single one of the ideas that comes out of our mouth before we're allowed to actually speak them out loud. Maybe you can relate to that. I am that way more often than I like to admit. I'm getting better, getting a lot better, but it's very much how I am. And ultimately, this is very much does a disservice to all of us that could stand to hear these voices, and does a disservice to us that are keeping ourselves quiet when we might have very valuable things to add to the conversation. And so this podcast is very much a way to make space for those kinds of conversations too. Storytelling will obviously be a big part of the show, both because that's kind of my thing, but it's also very much how we as humans make sense of the world. It's like the fundamental way that our brains operate. The stories that we share and perceive shape our reality. In order to create a new reality, we need to tell new stories that help us shape this new reality. And this is part of the plan I have for the podcast too, is to have conversations with the people I invite on and listen to their stories about who they feel like they are and what success looks like to them and what leadership requires of them and what challenges they face in the work that they're trying to do in the world. And start to flesh out what are the stories that we're all holding on to that live inside of our brains that quietly influence how we act, what we tolerate, what we see as possible, and what we're actually working towards. And so when I say this is a podcast about stories, it's not necessarily going to be about a storytelling as a performance podcast. It's more about the way stories create meaning. And these internal collective narratives guide our choices consciously and subconsciously in the way that we navigate through the world. And as I mentioned before, the title for this podcast could be Braver New Worlds. Obviously, that's a play off the Aldous Huxley novel, which is also based off a line pulled from Shakespeare. And while those authors meant that statement to be ironic, I'm actually kind of subverting that. We're talking very literally about Braver New Worlds. And it's a reference to the idea that imagining something better isn't just optimistic, it's actually brave. It actually takes some courage and bravery to think about what a different world might look like and what you could contribute towards making that. And I think it's very important work too. It's not something that we're prone to do very often either. And I think these are such important conversations to have, especially right now when the future feels so very, very uncertain. We're seeing old systems breaking down and we don't really have new answers for what the next thing's going to be. And I'll admit right now, as I'm saying this, I feel quite nervous about this too. That all feels very grandiose and sort of pie in the sky and even a little bit ridiculous. I'm recording this right now the week after Alex Preddy was shot and killed by ICE agents in Minneapolis. The ICE raids are escalating all over Minneapolis and they're showing up in other parts of the country too. I think all of us are wondering when they're going to show up in our own neighborhoods and communities if they haven't already. It feels like we're on a very, very dangerous path here in America, a slippery slope into authoritarianism and fascism. And we get these little glimpses of optimism, but it's tough too. It's hard to really feel like things are on a good course. the way things are going right now. And so as I'm getting ready to do this, getting ready to roll this out, it's been about a year in the making. There's a part of me that's like, yeah, sure, buddy, start your silly little podcast about your silly little hopeful visions. It's just what the world needs right now. Just another white dude starting a podcast. Yeah, speak your little ideas into a microphone and post on YouTube as if anybody's going to actually listen. But that goes back to that thing there too, where I'm like always dealing with my own doubts. And part of why I wanted to start this is because so many of us are dealing with doubts. We're not saying the things that we might want to say and we might want to put out into the world. And so if I believe this and I think it's important to talk about this, I got to do it, right? Because even when things feel dark, I think it's really important to have these conversations. And I'm very much looking forward to the kind of conversations I hope to be having in the course of doing this show. Because this darkness that we're in, it's not going to last forever. There's going to be an after this. Something's going to come after this. And what's that going to be? And so part of our job right now, pay attention to the light and hopefully guide ourselves towards that light for a future world that we all want to see. And so through the stories that we share in here, I hope what comes out is like real reflections on this sort of everyday courage that we all need to start inhabiting and what that really looks like in its own quiet, relational, and imperfect way. So that's the invitation I've got for you here today. And if you're somebody that's navigating some change in your life and you're navigating some self-doubt, questioning these inherited narratives that we've all picked up about success and leadership and identity and the way you're supposed to operate in the world, you're trying to live and lead with some kind of intention and humanity, trying to stay sane as our world gets crazier and crazier, then this podcast is probably for you. And so with that, welcome to Braver New Worlds, and keep an eye out for our first episode coming out probably a week after this one. All right, thanks.